And this was made in 1996 by a group. I guess the leader of the group, his name is Krell, and there were like 5 other people, but I'm just going to call it Krell's model. There are 7 variables according to this model that contribute to xenophobia and therefore racism. To describe it, well, not variables, there are items that move towards the variable. I'm going to post a picture of the model, and it's going to be in the ethnographic format, very easy to follow. All right, the variables, it's not 7, there are actually 5. The variables are feelings of powerlessness, fear and anger. You could call this a dependent variable, basically. Violence, treatment of the weak, foreigners, and asylum seekers. So it's like, basically poor treatment or whatever. They treat these particular things very especially. So treatment of the weak, whatever the weak is, foreigners and asylum seekers, or in other words, people from outside the country trying to get into the country. The items in question that are going to be directly used, like the independent variable, the manipulated variable, these are the 7 independent variables that I'm going to directly manipulate. And that is anomie, which is essential. It's not a very common word, but Krell uses it to describe the degradation of ethics in a society. So basically, that's like where you say, oh, you have to lock your doors before you leave. It's not a very safe neighborhood anymore. People don't believe in common decency. You can't trust anybody anymore. That's basically what anomie is. Obviously, kind of taken to an extreme. You could think of Detroit, for example. You can't trust anybody in Detroit. You can't park your car in Detroit, a really nice car, without it having at least attempt being broken into. That's anomie right there. The second item is losing out to modernization, which is essentially the feeling that other countries are accelerating in technology. So at the time when the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, they had just gotten the railroad around this time. It was a fairly new invention, but obviously their infrastructure was far inferior to most of the Western world. They had muleteers as like the primary mode of transportation. Dirt roads, like there was actually like a couple Armenian towns that actually managed to get asphalt roads during this time. And keep in mind, the railroad had been around for 60 years or something. It's fairly, it's been around for a long time. I mean, the new thing at the time might have been, maybe the tank or something like that. And that's something that the Ottoman Empire couldn't even imagine, So much of the Western world was far superior, technologically speaking, than the Ottoman Empire was. Next item, which alludes to what I just said, is the collapse of civilization, and that is explicitly stated in the ideologies and pan-Turkism. These are all explicitly put out there to stem the collapse of the empire, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and try to make the Ottoman Empire reclaim its former glory and make the Turks the superior race again, and prove, make the world tremble below the feet of the Turks, and all this stuff that Zia Kokop put forth. But obviously there was a mentality that they were trying to combat unsuccessfully, which was the collapse of civilization, and a lot of other things were contributing to that. They were losing lots of territory and a lot of wars, and that really, and besides that, their economy was just gone to shit, and most Turks were living in poverty at the time. Definitely the feeling of my civilization has collapsed. That's the third item. The fourth one is the crisis of masculinity. And it's kind of similar to collapse of civilization, except what it is that there's an established patriarchy, which is where the males are superior to the females. And obviously, since the economy was collapsing at the time, I'm not quite sure. See, you don't hear very much about the patriarchy of the Ottoman Empire. It's not really a hot topic, but I'd imagine that because the economy was collapsing, the the Turkish women were used to not working. Obviously, like I kind of said before, they're used to being around the house, and now some of the Turkish women were forced to help do some of the man's work, and for hundreds of years, the man has been the provider, and now the woman is helping to provide. It makes the man feel like I am not useful anymore. Sociologically speaking, this is a contributing factor to racism. Somebody is responsible for this current state of affairs. Somebody is responsible for how the ethics are declining. You can't trust anybody. Somebody is responsible for why we are held back and the rest of the world is going forward, technologically speaking. Someone is responsible for why our country is collapsing, and someone is responsible for why my wife has to get a job in order to help put food on the table. Somebody's responsible. And last, we have the last three, and that is political culture, dominance culture, and right-wing extremism. Political culture goes back to pan-Turkism and pan-Islamism and pan-Islam and pan-Ottomanism. All these ideologies, Ziya all these people that were really trying to put down a lot of reforms to unite the Ottoman Empire, that sort of thing. The explicit government regulations, reforms to try and basically erase the Armenian culture, but in an attempt to make the Ottoman Empire whole. That is basically political culture, and that's where you get treatment of the weak. In this case, treatment of the weak is obviously the Armenians, because Armenians are not foreigners. I don't think there was such a thing as treatment of the Armenians as foreigners, because for hundreds of years they had been a part of the Ottoman Empire. But you could make the argument that they saw them as rogue elements. Like, these things are like a germ, that they're infecting the Ottoman Empire. They don't belong here. That sort of thing. You could make the argument that they're foreigners and weak, whatever. But that's political culture. Dominance culture, that's explicitly stated where, for hundreds of years the Turks have always been the superior class, and the Armenians have always been second class, no matter what. And the Armenians accepted this for hundreds of years. They'd been okay with it. And occasionally there'd be, really poor treatment of them, but they had no concept of human rights or whatever before the late 19th century. Maybe they had been okay with that.